And it seems to me that this is also now starting to have create doubts amongst other people in the United States as well. So we've now had a very, very interesting editorial, or at least an article by the New York Times editorial team. Now, the New York Times is, of course, a fervidly pro-Democrat newspaper in the United States. It has at times been used by officials in Democratic administrations. It was very common for this to happen during Obama's time, but it was sometimes used by officials in Democratic administrations as a place to express opinions about policies. And we've had, as I said, this very interesting article. It's not exactly, I think, an editorial comment, but it was one written by the editorial team at the New York Times. And this article clearly sets out a demand for a shift in policy. The article begins by acknowledging the fact that the consensus supporting the war, supporting Ukraine in the United States, is starting to crack, and it referred to the fact that as these Republican representatives and senators in Congress were starting to make statements that were opposing the war. But, well, not just statements opposing the war, but that they voted against the $40 billion aid package. But now we see what the New York Times, its editorial team, said. And very interestingly, they seemed to call for a compromise, for a negotiated peace with Ukraine making the big concessions. And these are some of the things that this New York Times editorial said. It says the following. Recent bellicose statements from Washington, President Biden's assertion that Mr. Putin cannot remain in power, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's comment that Russia must be weakened, and the pledge by the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi that the United States would support Ukraine until victory is won, may be rousing proclamations of support, but they do not bring negotiations any closer. In the end, it is Ukrainians who must make the hard decisions. They are the ones fighting, dying, and losing their homes to Russian aggression, and it is they who must decide what an end to the war might look like. If the conflict does lead to real negotiations, it will be Ukrainian leaders who will have to make the painful territorial decisions that any compromise will demand. Now, that isn't exactly a call for Ukraine to decide to negotiate and to make painful territorial decisions, which are what a compromise would require. It's not quite that, but essentially that's what it says. It says that Ukraine needs to sit down and negotiate and accept the surrender of territory, the loss of territory. And then the editorial says elsewhere, as the war continues, Mr. Biden should also make clear to President Zelenski and his people that there is a limit to how far the United States and NATO will go to confront Russia, and limits to the arms, money, and political support they can muster. It is imperative that the Ukrainian government's decisions be based on a realistic assessment of its means and how much more destruction Ukraine can sustain. Confronting this reality may be painful, but it is not appeasement. This is what governments are duty-bound to do, not chase after an illusory win and the word win is in quotation marks, Russia will be feeling the pain of isolation and debilitating economic sanctions for years to come, and Mr. Putin will go down in history as a butcher. The challenge now is to shake off the euphoria, stop the taunting, and focus on defining and completing the mission. America's support for Ukraine is a test of its place in the world in the 21st century, and Mr. Biden has an opportunity and an obligation to help define what that will be. Now, if one takes out the padding, if one takes out the irrelevancies, that looks like a call from the New York Times editorial team to the administration, to President Biden himself, to stop talking about defeating Russia in Ukraine, to recognize that what that is doing is destroying Ukraine, to urge the Ukrainians to sit down and to negotiate, and to acknowledge the fact that Ukraine is going to have to make significant territorial concessions. At the very least, it's going to have to accept the loss of Crimea, Donbass, and now Kherson region and Zaporozhye, most of Zaporozhye. Perhaps the Russians will demand more. If the war continues for much longer, it is certain that they will demand more. The point is that that is what the New York Times is essentially saying, that the Ukrainian government, Zelensky's government, should do. And it is also what the New York Times is telling President Biden that he should do. And the New York Times is also telling President Biden, and it is also telling Ukraine, that there are limits to the amount of military, financial, and other types of support that the United States can provide Ukraine. US support to Ukraine is not unlimited. The United States may be reaching the point beyond which it cannot go on supporting Ukraine further. So, quite a strong editorial comment from the New York Times. Now, I wonder whether this reflects dissension within the administration. I wonder whether this also reflects dissension within the Democratic Party. It's always seemed to me, and I'm not, an expert on the political intrigues within the Democratic Party, but it does make me wonder whether the New York Times, which I've always personally felt is perhaps more closely aligned with Barack Obama and his people in the Democratic Party, whether perhaps the Obama Kamala Harris wing are starting to get very seriously concerned about where this war is going. They are starting to worry that the old man, the president, is utterly obsessed by this war in Ukraine to the point of almost total exclusion of consideration of all other issues. That the economy in the United States is going into ever deeper stagflationary crisis as a result, that there's no real solution to these problems until something is done to end the war, and that the Democrats look likely to lose badly in the midterm elections in November, which could create all kinds of further problems for the Democrats, especially with all these legal cases now being brought, first by the Durham investigation, which is now suing or prosecuting Michael Sussman, this lawyer who acted for the Clinton campaign during the 2016 election and who had a major role in Russiagate. And of course, there's also the laptop gate investigation underway as well. So it does seem to me as if there's growing alarm on the part of some people in the Democratic Party that things are not going to plan, that things are not turning out as expected, that Ukraine is losing the war, that the United States and the West are facing a serious economic crisis, and that there is now growing risk, always worrying for Democrats, that the Republicans might win back first Congress and then the White House and use the power that that gives them to carry out a major and sustained attack on the Democratic Party, exploiting all of these scandals that lie in the past, Russiagate, Laptopgate, and all the rest. And that they're now trying to convey to President Biden and to his foreign policy team that this thing has gone as far as it can go, and the time has come to look for a negotiated solution and to call a stop. Well, I hope that is true. I will say this: how much better, if that is what happens now, how much better it would have been if all of this had been done in March, if instead of sabotaging the negotiations that were looking as if they might start to move somewhere following that meeting in Istanbul in late March, that meeting between the Ukrainian and Russian negotiators in Istanbul. How much better if instead of sabotaging the emerging consensus towards a diplomatic track to end the crisis that was starting to crystallize in Istanbul, something which the US government and the British government did, they worked to sabotage those negotiations. How much better if the United States and Britain had instead supported the negotiations in Istanbul instead of sabotaging them? Thousands of lives would have been spared. Far less damage to Ukraine would have been done. The situation in the world economy might have been less critical, and there might have been less signs of dissent spreading across the collective West. Well, as we know, Britain and the United States, Boris Johnson and President Biden, the old man in the White House, took a different course. And to be straightforward about it, for the moment, I don't think that they're prepared to reverse course. This New York Times editorial is an interesting sign that dissent is starting to appear. I don't think that it's yet anywhere near strong enough to force the administration to change course. Anyway, we shall see, but it is interesting that with events in Ukraine, with the situation in the world economy, all of them starting to take a particularly alarming course, alarming obviously for the Western powers, we are starting to see the first serious voices talking for a reverse, for a change of direction, and for a need to negotiate a compromise. Well, thank you for joining me for this program today. I look forward to you joining me again soon for future programs on this channel. I would ask in the meantime that you remember that you can find us on Rumble and Locals. Remember, if you're watching these programs on Rumble, if you go to the top of the video, you can see a red maroon button that will take you directly to our Locals homepage, where you can join our thriving community on Locals, participate there in the exclusive content that we publish on Locals, including my live streams, which happen every Wednesday at 1400 hours Eastern Standard Time, and which are exclusive to Locals. You can also join us. On other platforms, on the new free speech platform, SuperU, on Odyssey. We've now got a thriving Telegram channel as well. And you can also support us via Patreon and Subscribestar. Don't forget to go to our shop, check out our shop. We have amazing things that you can find there. And last but not least, please remember to tick the like button if you've liked this video, and to check your subscription to this channel. Thank you for joining me again today. I look forward to you joining me again soon. and have a wonderful and very good day until then.